Hello and happy Douglas Week, everyone. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us here on YouTube. And thank you for joining us for the third day of the third annual Douglas Week. My name is Dr. Caroline Dunham-Schroeder. I'm the founder of Douglas Week, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you for this very special event, the fifth Frederick Douglass Ireland Curriculum event. And I'm here with a co-founder, collaborator, and friend of Douglas Week, Kristen Leary. And of course, our brilliant guest speakers today, Molly DePippo from the New York Historical Society and Dr. Jack Kaufman-McKivigan from Indiana University. And if you don't know about it, the Fred Douglass Ireland Curriculum is a groundbreaking initiative that we started in 2021, which aims to engage student audiences with the inspiring stories of Frederick Douglass in Ireland through innovative teaching methods. And Kristen, do you want to say maybe a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, now this is the fifth edition of this event in this program, and it's an exciting opportunity for educators to embrace new perspectives and strategies and to expand the network of international educators dedicated to teaching influential figures like Frederick Douglass and many others. During the event, educators from the United States who possess extensive experience in teaching Douglass will share their valuable knowledge and expertise with you.
Yeah, and on that note, welcome to our wonderful panelists. We're very happy that you were able to join us for what we know will be a very inspiring conversation, for lots of insights waiting for us. I know that, and I'm looking forward to it. And thank you, everyone, for watching around the world. Thank you for your interest in Douglas Week and for tuning in today. We're thrilled to be online as every year, and you guys joining us from around the world. But we're also really happy that we are in Rochester, New York, a city that was so important to Douglas and his life. And his family lived here for over 25 years. Right, Kristen?
Yes, that's right. We hope you enjoy this Douglas Week event and others in person and online, in person in Rochester and in Cork in Ireland. And if you like this event, we're sure you'll love the other more than 35 events we have planned this year. So check out our website, douglasweek.org, and follow us on social media to learn more. In the meantime, let's introduce you to our two speakers today. Jack Kaufman-McKivigan joined the staff of the Douglass Papers at Yale University in 1979 after receiving his PhD from the Ohio State University. Jack. He succeeded John Blassingame as project director in 1994 and moved the Douglass Papers first to West Virginia University in 1989 and then Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis in 1998. Jack has published extensively on the history of American radical and reform movements, as well as Frederick Douglass. He also directs the community engagement program, Hoosiers Reading Frederick Douglass Together, that I think we're going to hear a little bit more about today, that conducts public participation readings of Douglass's speeches in libraries, schools, churches, and historic sites. And we're really excited, Jack, that you continue to join us every year for Douglass Week, and we really appreciate your partnership and friendship.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kristen, for the introduction. Jack, it's great for you to be here again. Second time this week. Absolutely delighted to see you. And our second speaker today is Molly DePippo. Molly is the manager of professional learning at the New York Historical Society and Museum. Super exciting. She has worked with K-12 students and teachers in several New York area museums, including the Museum of Art, of Modern Art, the National September 11th Memorial and Museum, and the Museum of Jewish History for over 7 years. We're going to hear more about all of her experience there. And in her current role at the New York Historical Society, she manages and facilitates national professional development programs for teachers. So super stoked that you're here, Molly. Hello and welcome. And back over to you, Kristen.
Yeah, just briefly, we'll now start with Jack, then hear from Molly, and we'll join back together for a brief discussion afterwards. Thanks very much, everybody. Jack, over to you.
All right. Hi, I'm Jack Kaufman-McKivigan. I've been the editor of the Frederick Douglass, as I guess you just heard this, for quite a few years. When I say 1979, I hope you're shocked. How could he be doing it that many years? All right, but when they say your life's work, I guess this is my life's work. So I'm going to do share screen and tell you a little bit about Hoosiers reading Frederick Douglass together. Right. If I can. Share. There we go. All right, it's really nice to talk to this audience because usually I have to give an introduction to give some background about who Frederick Douglass was. Now, this is one audience I can spare myself this joke resume I put together for Frederick Douglass. I will point out there's a lot of things toward the bottom of it. Many people haven't heard about Douglass, his role as a president of a bank, a U.S. Marshal in the District of Columbia, the Recorder of Deeds, which is actually a very lucrative job, ambassador to Haiti, and a world-renowned lecturer. So he had quite a career beyond what we generally know about him as a slave and as an abolitionist. Now, the Frederick Douglass Papers, let me just very briefly tell you, was founded by my friend and the late John W. Blassingame at Yale University. And we've been working since 1973. I joined again in 1979 to collect, edit, and publish the papers of Frederick Douglass. That's his speeches, his autobiographies, his correspondence, and his prolific journalism. And this project has gone on again for 50 years. We've gotten 12 of our 15 volumes into print. One's almost ready to come out this year. But while this appeals to a scholarly audience, we got the feeling that maybe we were losing touch with the broader audience of people who would be interested in learning more about Frederick Douglass. And so we began first we produced some paperbacks to try, our hard copy volumes were expensive, so we began to produce paperbacks to reach a somewhat broader audience. But even more so, we learned in recent years about a project that actually began in Boston, where a group gathered to do a public reading of Douglass's iconic "What the Slave is the 4th of July." The audience for this event grew year by year until Massachusetts Humanities picked up the program, and it's still conducted in that state. It was a similar program was done for many years in Vermont, also in District of Columbia, and then many different locations have done it kind of on a smaller scale. But in 2018, which was Douglass's 200th birthday, we decided to bring this program to Indiana. And so we created our own, don't ask me to give you an explanation for why people from Indiana have this nickname Hoosiers. It's older than that movie about basketball, but it goes way back. But we decided to call this program Hoosiers Reading Frederick Douglass Together. We initially launched it in July of 2019 to produce a public reading of the 4th of July speech. And then we realized now we got to wait 11 months, 12 months to do it again. And we didn't want to do that. And so we decided to expand the repertoire. And so Hoosiers Reading Frederick Douglass Together actually has 7 different speeches by Frederick Douglass that we have available to the public to in various lengths, because if anybody's read Frederick Douglass's speeches in their entirety, which I'm one of the people who has, some of them are published more than 30 pages. It was a different era where audiences could listen to a speaker, and a speaker with the ability of Douglass for many, many hours. And literally, he spoke for many, many hours. Modern audiences want something a bit shorter. We also wanted to have discussions following this. And so we have abridged Douglass in these 7 different speeches. Oh, let me go back. So let me just describe some of these speeches and the purpose of them. Again, we would go out and find a local sponsor for this event, a church, a library, a community center. We often go to Underground Railroad sites, and with them, our sponsors really bring us the audience, right? And what we present is the text, and we do a group reading. We pass the text around. Everybody gets a turn. Some people are eloquent. Some people have trouble with the language. It doesn't matter. It kind of humanizes the event and the experience. And then when it's done, we will go ahead and have a discussion of these speeches. I often try to find a local hook. If Douglass had ever spoken in this town, we wanted to bring that up. I'm from Indiana again, and Douglass had a famous speech he delivered in a town called Pendleton, Indiana. Well, when we got invited to be in Pendleton, we had to let the audience know, well, I'm sorry, when last time Douglass was here, you guys mobbed him, right, and stoned him, which is kind of embarrassing. But the local historian said, no, that was people who came over from Noblesville, a neighboring community. They attacked Douglass. We're a Quaker town. We welcomed him to our community. So those kind of local hooks, connections kind of develop a rapport with the audience. So let me just tell you, of course, we use Douglass's 4th of July speech. That's where we start. It's an iconic speech that kind of addresses the two Americas, the white America, which celebrates the 4th of July and the principles of the 4th of July, and then the non-white America, who often feel that these principles haven't been applied to them with fairness. And certainly when Douglass delivered this in 1852, it was obvious that African Americans were not treated as equal citizens of the United States. But the purpose of doing this reading today is to encourage our audience to, and we do this in the discussions that follow, to see the relevance of the issues that Douglass brings up to events today, our current setting, that, 200 years later, plus years later, do these principles of the Declaration of Independence really apply to all citizens equally? And this speech always leads into a great discussion with the audience of people who bring up, well, I don't think that's true, or in my case, or my, some relatives, they cite what they think is obvious discrimination, racial discrimination, sometimes other forms of discrimination that they have encountered, and they say that's not what this country was meant to found, was founded upon. This is something that needs to be changed. And we talk about if Douglass was still alive, what would he do about it? And a lifelong agitator, we know what Douglass would have done. He would have been protesting it. But let me tell you about some of the other speeches. The 4th of July speech is familiar to many people. In 1881, Douglass gave a famous speech called, I Am a Radical Woman Suffrage Man. In the late 1860s, early 1870s, he had some trouble with the women's suffrage movement. Now, he had been a longtime supporter of it. He actually went to the Seneca Falls meeting. But during Reconstruction, when the 15th Amendment was proposed to the Constitution, to get it passed, it had to be narrowed to just extend suffrage to Black men. And of course, women's suffrage advocates, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and thousands more, were kind of upset at being left out of this. They favored universal suffrage. They weren't opposed to Black male suffrage. No, that definitely not. The goal was universal suffrage. This couldn't occur, couldn't get through Congress, and Douglass supported the 15th Amendment. But in the last quarter century of his life, he continued to work for women's suffrage. He appeared at meetings, spoke frequently on behalf of women's suffrage. And in fact, the last speech he ever gave was at a women's suffrage meeting in Washington, D.C. on the last day of his life. Now, I think today we have the 19th Amendment and we've achieved women's suffrage, but I don't think it's too hard for after having read the speech, for an audience to begin to, a modern audience, to begin to question, well, do women really have completely equal rights, even though they now are recognized as citizens and as voters in the United States? And believe me, it doesn't take any time for people to begin to say, no, there are still significant problems. After last year's Supreme Court ruling, I think that reproductive rights would be brought up, unequal pay in the workplace, the issues. Again, the speech is just a stimulus for a modern day audience to realize that the principles that Douglass was advancing a century or more ago still are relevant today. The specific issues might have changed slightly, but are still important today. Maybe the most significant of these is one of Douglass's very last speeches. It's called Lessons of the Hour. And for him, the hour was 1894, and the issue was lynching. There was a wave of lynching beginning in the late 19th century of African-American males accused of rape. I.B. Wells, another important African-American journalists, exposed the fraudulent charges in the vast majority of these cases. But Douglass became a public speaker on this for this cause, and Lessons of the Hour was to protest that people were being murdered without a trial, without due process, without well, in 2020, we had the case of George Floyd, who wasn't lynched, but the outcome was the same. And the relevance of this issue of extrajudicial, quote, justice, or really in reality injustice directed against African Americans and other people of color, again, reading Lessons of the Hour, the audience just immediately begins to give me examples of how injustice in the criminal justice system continues to exist today. Mass incarceration, the school to jail pipeline. The examples, unfortunately, are very numerous. So Douglass's words and ideas again stimulate modern audience to see contemporary issues of injustice and discuss, well, what can we do about that? I think you're going to hear more about one of his speeches in a minute from Molly, but he gave a famous address in 1969 called Our Composite Nationality, when he was complaining about nativism, a movement to ban immigrants from coming into the United States. And the target in 1869 were Chinese immigrants. But again, modern day audiences see the parallels to South American and Central American and Caribbean. The list goes on. Fortunately, not all Americans feel that way, but many really are readopting this nativist position, which Douglass felt was directly contrary to what he saw as the vision of an America, a composite America, where all people of all sorts of backgrounds could contribute to this nation. So again, it's an excellent speech to lead into a discussion of modern issues. One more and I'll stop. Self-made man. Douglass gave this speech for over 50 years. He gave it in England and Ireland, as well as all across the United States. Basically, he's talking about opportunity, that education is a way that people can, you seek it out, you learn, you apply yourself, and you succeed. That's the American dream. And Douglass applauded that dream, but he also noted the obstacles that many people encounter in trying to achieve that dream. He himself was a big advocate of education. To his credit, he made sure his daughter and all of his granddaughters went to school to not going to school, they went to normal school. They all became teachers. Right? He himself never went to school one day, but he made sure his own descendants appreciated education. Well, last week we had the Supreme Court throwing up obstacles to the descendants of Frederick Douglass's grandchildren to get into higher education. So that issue, again, still present, and one that people would want to discuss, again, being primed with the words and thoughts of Frederick Douglass from the 19th century, still relevant in the 21st century. I could go on. I'm worried I'm running long here, but again, Douglass's words just resonate so well with our society today. It's amazing. When we say lessons of the hour, the hours today, folks, things really haven't changed as we wanted them to. Now, I talked to some teachers, a teacher workshop just in the last day of June, and we went and discussed some of these speeches, and some of the teachers actually expressed misgivings. If we read a 4th of July speech, I'm worried that some parents might think we're being unpatriotic. When we talk about the lynching speech, how can we be even-handed in are we going to bring in texts pro-lynching to have this discussion? Unfortunately, and I'm very sympathetic, a lot of our teachers are looking over their shoulder today. And I just had to be honest with them. I said, well, if you want my opinion, Frederick Douglass is, at least one of the co-founders of critical race theory. But I don't think you probably want to tell your school board that. But I do want you not to be afraid to bring his words into your classrooms, because I think they remain as relevant today, sadly, as they were when he spoke them in the 19th century.
Thank you, John. Thank you. I think that's a fabulous note to hand over to Molly. Thank you, Jack, for this overview of the project, for sharing with your with our audience your experience, your thoughts, and work. And we have lots of questions for you, but we'll hold off until we hear from Molly. And if you wouldn't mind, stop sharing your screen now, Jack, and then Molly, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So just give me one moment to share my screen. All right. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak during Douglass Week. I'm really excited to be here today. And as mentioned, I work at the New York Historical Society, which is located in New York City, right by Central Park, if you're ever in the city. We were founded in 1804, so we're actually New York City's oldest, first museum. And today the museum really tries to share the stories of not just the city and the state, but all of the United States through its collections, exhibitions, and education programs. And so today I'm really excited to share a bit about our free online curriculum guide called Our Composite Nation, Frederick Douglass's America, which is based on an exhibition of the same name at the New York Historical Society. And you can see an image of the exhibition on the screen. And the curriculum looks closely at Frederick Douglass's Composite Nation speech, which Jack mentioned, which he gave during the height of Reconstruction in 1869. And at the time, he actually felt more optimistic about the U.S. than ever before. Congress was adding 3 revolutionary amendments to the U.S. Constitution with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Black Americans were free citizens, and all Black men would soon have the right to vote. And in the midst of all this progress, Douglass develops this really passionate vision for America, where these new rights and freedoms would be granted to any person who wanted to call the United States home. And so in the speech, he focuses on 3 principles that he believes will make the U.S. a great place for anyone to thrive. And those 3 principles are absolute equality, so full equality for all, regardless of race, gender, religion. And then the second one is composite nationality, so welcoming immigrants and embracing the diversity of America's population. And then religious liberty, right? Anyone is free to practice any faith that they wish. And he believed that if Americans really embrace these 3 principles, the U.S. could live up to its full potential and be a really wonderful country. So I think, as Jack was discussing, we can see why this speech is so resonant and still relevant today. And so the Composite Nation Curriculum Guide is here for educators to give you resources to allow you and your students to take a deep dive into Douglass's vision and connect it to also important historical events of the late 19th century. The materials were developed for middle school students, but they can be scaled up or down depending on the age of your students. But here are the key ideas in the curriculum that students will hopefully understand after exploring the materials. So the first key idea in the curriculum is Frederick Douglass was a leading champion in the 19th century fight for equality for all Americans. Frederick Douglass believed that the United States needed to embrace its increasing diversity, ensure absolute equality, and protect religious liberty in order to enter a new era of peace and prosperity. And finally, Frederick Douglass's vision for the United States has not yet been fully realized, but many courageous Americans have continued to follow his lead. So what will you find when you look at the curriculum? So the materials are organized into 5 sections. So the first section, Composite Nation on Tour, takes a deep dive, a close look at the speech itself and how Douglass shared it with the world when he toured the Northeast and the Midwest. And then absolute equality, composite nationality, and religious liberty are the principles that I described that Douglass promoted in his speech. And each of those sections is investigating these different themes and these principles and how they are being realized or unfortunately not realized in the country at the time. And then the final section, Hope, was actually a recommendation from our curatorial team. Because ultimately Frederick Douglass was, of course, deeply disappointed at the end of his life that America had not lived up to the principles that he had envisioned in his speech, but he did remain hopeful that it was possible. And we found that this is a really powerful section for students because it explores the idea that someone like Frederick Douglass could hold 2 ideas at the same time, right? That he was disillusioned that America could not live up to the promises of Reconstruction. But at the same time, he remained optimistic that the U.S. could turn into a great country if it just embraced principles like equality, acceptance, and liberty. And again, I think this just shows how relevant his ideas can be for students today. So I am actually going to share the website with you all just so you can get an idea of how it works. So let me share the website. So this is the homepage of the website. And if I scroll over to the curriculum tab, you'll see each of the sections that I described, as well as a video library, which I'll show an example of in a little bit. But I'm going to demonstrate how to navigate the site using the absolute equality section. So when you click on one of the sections, you can see that each section starts with a quote from the speech. So we have the quote about absolute equality. Then it moves into a brief introduction of what the section will be about. And if we keep scrolling, we'll see the key ideas for this particular section, as well as essential questions that you can use to discuss with students or to frame your classroom discussion if you were to incorporate this in your lessons. And then we move into the real meat of the curriculum, right? We have our primary sources and brief biographies of individuals that we call life stories. So each section starts with a life story that we think, kind of embodies the principle that the section is about. And so as you can see, this section starts with the life story of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, who was a Black activist who really demonstrated how Black women at the time were advocating for change based on both their race and their gender. And she has some really great writings to explore with students as well. And then we have a resource on streetcar desegregation in Philadelphia that was going on before the end of the Civil War, just to show you, how long this struggle was for absolute equality. And then a resource about white resistance. And this is an election broadside that shows how widespread this resistance was during Reconstruction. So if you just keep scrolling down, it'll actually go through all of the resources. So I'm just going to scroll through the life story here, but you'll see, it usually starts with an image and then goes into some biographical text. And then if we scroll through the whole life story, you'll see there are vocabulary lists. So students have access to that as they read. They also include, keep scrolling, discussion questions after they finish reading to help them process what they learned, and suggested activities for you as the educator, so that you don't really have to do the work to figure out how to incorporate the materials into your classroom. We have some activities that you can use. And then if you keep scrolling, the last thing is other curriculum connections, because we have a pretty vast curriculum library, and this will help you kind of make those connections across different time periods and different themes. And as you can see, you can also print each section. So if that's easier for you and your students to have paper versions, that's available to you as well. But at this point, I'm going to go back to the video library, because I think these are really great tools to use with students. We have a video for each featured life story that is included in the curriculum. They're about 2.5 minutes long, animated videos. So you can see we have a Frederick Douglass video, and I'm actually going to show you the Frances Ellen Watkins Harper video.
"100 years before the concept of intersectionality was first introduced to the world by Professor Kimberly W. Crenshaw, activist Frances Ellen Watkins Harper asked Americans to consider the unique challenges faced by Black women. Born in Baltimore in 1825, Watkins Harper was raised by her aunt and uncle in a thriving free Black community. She attended the Academy for Negro Youth, a school run by her uncle, until she was 13. She grew up in a world where most Black Americans were enslaved against their wills, and women had no rights as citizens, forcing them to rely on their male relatives to provide legal and financial support. But Watkins Harper had a talent. She was a gifted writer. She published her first short stories in Black journals when she was just 14. By the time she'd reached her 20s, Watkins Harper had earned a reputation as a leading abolitionist. In 1853, she began touring the country, giving talks for the American Anti-Slavery Society. After slavery was finally abolished in 1865, Watkins Harper dedicated herself to other causes, including equal rights for Black Americans and women's suffrage. During a groundbreaking speech at the National Women's Rights Convention, she spoke passionately about the oppression she faced as both a Black person and a woman, arguing that she would not be truly equal until both of her identities were treated with respect. She inspired the attendees to start a new group dedicated to promoting Black and women's rights. Unfortunately, the unity she inspired did not last. Some suffragists, like Susan B. Anthony, opposed the 15th Amendment because it would grant the right to vote to Black men, but not women. Watkins Harper supported the 15th Amendment because she believed it was an important step on the road to universal suffrage. When the women's suffrage movement continued to fracture along race lines, Watkins Harper co-founded the National Association for Colored Women to give Black women a space to share their views and advocate for change. How do intersecting identities shape people's experiences in the United States today.
And I think this is a great video to show because though she's not as well known as Douglass, Watkins Harper's story is, I think, just as powerful and shows how her activism was impacted by her experiences and mistreatment due to her race and her gender. And there are a lot of parallels between her life and Douglass's life that can be kind of an interesting discussion to have with your students. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint briefly. Give me one moment. So, and this is just to say that everything is available for free on our website if you go to the link on the screen. And we also have a vast curriculum library that covers many other aspects of American history. But it looks like I'm out of time, so I'm going to hand it back to Caroline, and hopefully we'll have a little discussion. But thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Molly. Wonderful insights, amazing resources. Really glad you shared those with us. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, we do have lots of questions. I think we have to have another session because we only have time for 2 or 3 questions each, because seriously, I think this is so useful and will help so many educators out there. Both of you guys have so many great insights and resources that will be helpful to many of the people watching out there. So thank you for sharing all of that, and looking forward to many future conversations with you both. Let's jump right into some questions, because I think that we do have a few, Kristen, right? I'll maybe start because since Molly, since you spoke last, I'll ask you one first. I'll pass over to Kristen, then after that for Jack. So you are the manager of professional learning at the New York Historical Society, but you also have previous experience, Molly. And, you know, we're talking about teaching Douglass, teaching changemakers. You showed us this wonderful video. There's lots of changemakers that we don't know about or know less about. But also being an educator, teacher myself, I know that there's often also challenges when educators, try and teach about Frederick Douglass and other change makers, abolitionists, and Jack, I'm sure that you can chime in there as well. But, do you have any thoughts on ideas on how educators can overcome some of these challenges? And have you identified any of these or faced them during your time before the Historical Society or now?
Yeah, so I think with someone like Douglass, there's just so much. He left behind so much written material, which is a great opportunity, but can pose a challenge, I think, for educators, because it can be hard to choose what to share in the classroom. And I think that's why when you look through our curriculum guides, you won't see fully scripted lesson plans, because we know that teachers kind of are always running out of time and don't have enough time to fit everything in and have so many standards to meet. So something that we suggest is kind of like this plug and play strategy where if you're already teaching about Reconstruction, you can just slide in an excerpt from Composite Nation into your lesson, spend some time with that primary source document, but you don't have to create an entirely new lesson plan based around the speech itself. It's just adding kind of an excerpt here and there. Because again, we know that teachers don't necessarily have the time to deep dive on some of these amazing writings that we have. And kind of going along with that, and I know this is something that Jack mentioned as well, is a lot of the language can be difficult for students to access, because 19th century language is quite different from how we speak now. And something that we do at the New York Historical Society is create document transcriptions, where on one side we have the original text of the document, and then on the other side there's a modern day summary, so that students can, depending on their reading level, they can read the document text or they can read the summary, but they're still going to be able to access Douglass's ideas. And we actually did that for an excerpt from Composite Nation. So again, just trying to reduce the barriers when accessing primary source documents.
Thanks, that's great and fascinating. The website is something I have already bookmarked to go back to and look at myself. I am not an educator, but I want to educate myself a little bit more. So thanks for sharing those, and I know those will be well bookmarked by others as well. But Jack, I wanted to ask you something, going back to the experience of, and I've participated in, you mentioned Washington, D.C. had done a similar event to Reading Frederick Douglass Together. And it was, for me, it wasn't something that I had sought out. I happened upon an event at one point, and it was very moving to participate in that. And I wonder, and I know it was for all of the other people who were participating in that particular reading in Washington. I wonder if you, through your experience of doing Hoosiers Reading Frederick Douglass Together, if there are any other figures or eras or topics that you think would benefit from that kind of a community engagement aspect, and or what kind of advice or recommendations would you give to educators watching here today who are inspired by and interested in implementing that sort of community engagement activity in their place?
Yeah. Well, I think the key is that I call it in my talk a local hook. There is so much available history, not always easy to dig up, but it's there. The Library of Congress has a project that has reproduced newspapers from the 19th century and the 20th century that you can go back and track down particular events and discover so many of these sadly forgotten individuals who in a local way played a very important role in challenging all sorts of forms of oppression. Kind of the local heroes, the unsung heroes, they can be researched. About 25 years ago, the federal government promoted a program called Trails for Freedom about the Underground Railroad. And the number of these conductors operating in these local communities, it's thousands of individuals, kind of risk their lives breaking the law to aid an enslaved person who was trying to find a safer location. So that almost every city, every town has a history that can be used and brought into the classroom.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. I think that's a really good idea. The kind of like a local hook. I think that's a really great idea. I'd love to talk a lot more about that because this is not specifically or exclusively for Irish educators, but as you know from our intro that we're trying to put together this Frederick Douglass Ireland curriculum, and there's lots there. There's a local hook there because Douglass traveled to Ireland and to the UK, and but I would love to explore more and Molly, I want to come back to you as well, because I know teaching influential figures like Douglass, can change lives, and can motivate students. But also, we were all talking about this. Jack, you mentioned the situation now, the contemporary situation, and the continued legacy of his words and his work earlier. So how can these resources that you are creating, Molly, but also Jack, how can they contribute to a more inclusive and diverse education experience for students? Because like you said, there's so little time for educators. How can we, contribute to that? Like, how does your website, for example, and the resources that you showed us, how can that help us and students specifically? Because that's what we're doing it for, right? Whom we're doing it for. How can it help their experience?
Well, something that we've seen has a lot of impact is incorporating it into civics lessons, which is such an emphasis in the United States right now, trying to bolster students' civics knowledge and education. And I think the Composite Nation speech is just so perfect for that because it is about what steps can we take to make this country a better place for everyone to live and to thrive? And that is just as relevant today as it was when Douglass wrote that in 1869. And I think it's a really great springboard for students, if we have them read the speech and kind of start to unpack those different principles, how they might be able to make those changes in their own lives. And we've seen it really empowers them, right, to see themselves as people who have agency and who can make change, because I think it can get a little overwhelming when kids look around and see how many issues there are that we're still dealing with, but maybe really zeroing in on how can we interpret absolute equality today, or how can we embrace immigrants in this country today, and really have them choose a principle that stands out to them, and then kind of move it into the present day. And what are the steps that you might take, not maybe for the whole country, but even in your community, and starting there. Because again, we don't want to overwhelm students and say, you have to fix everything, but just starting small and starting with those small steps, and using Douglass to hopefully inspire them to do that. And we have seen some really great discussions with students when we teach this in the museum or virtually as well.
Yeah, thank you, Molly. That's a great way to approach this, and I really liked your what you mentioned earlier, that like having the 18th century, 19th century text and then this modern summary. I think that makes it so relevant, and like Jack said, sadly, this is all so relevant today, right? So I really love that there, and kind of like connected to that question. Thank you, Molly. This is the last question for both of you, and maybe Jack, you want to start. But what kind of advice or recommendation would you give to educators attending this event? Because we're looking for advice. We're looking for what have you done? How do you approach this? So people who are interested in implementing community engagement programs, or student resources about influential figures like Douglass, how in their respective regions and countries and communities, what advice and recommendations do you have sort of as a wrap for educators who are watching this?
There we go. My suggestion is humanize Douglass. His life is he looks iconic. He should be on Mount Rushmore with those presidents. But he was a father, a husband, a grandfather. He ran small business. He had his experiences that everybody can identify with. When his daughter was put into a segregated classroom, he was an outraged parent. There's so many instances in his life that have modern, comparable, or universal experiences that other people can identify with. So he's a great orator, and he stands with his arm out, but he was a human being who had trouble getting the seat on the train sometimes because the conductor didn't like the color of his skin. So those kind of personal experiences, I think, can really make Douglass more accessible to a modern audience.
Thank you, Jack. Molly, do you have any thoughts on that?
Something that I would suggest, and something that we've tried out with students, is to, when we talk about Frederick Douglass with students, framing his life and his work as being part of like the long civil rights movement, right? Because in the United States, the civil rights, as we think of the 50s and 60s, but really framing his life as being part of this long struggle for equality in this nation. And he's just one of many, many, many figures who have worked extremely hard to do this work and continue this work today. And I think it's also great because it can include the work of not only Black activists, but Asian Americans and Latinx activists and Indigenous people, all these groups that have been marginalized in this country, who have in some way contributed to making it a better place because they continue this long fight. So that's something that I would encourage student or teachers to do is to frame it in this way that Douglass is, of course, an amazing figure, but also there are so many other amazing figures in this country's history that have done the work to try to make this a better place.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And on that note, I really love that the humanizing of Frederick Douglass, and at the same time celebrating him for the icon that he was. Also might add one of my personal favorites, that he had a dog. He was a dog owner. I'm also a dog owner, and his dog Frank was with him in his study, and when he was reading and writing, and humanizing Douglass. And love all of that. Let's continue this in an additional session. Love this, everyone who is tuning in today. If you have questions, or if you're interested in getting involved, if you want to learn more from Molly and Jack, please get in touch. Please join us, and we're absolutely excited to hear from you. Guys, this was fantastic. Looking forward to the next session. Molly DePippo from the New York Historical Society, and Dr. Jack Kaufman-McKivigan, Jack, from University of Indiana. Thank you so much for this. Happy Douglass Week. We'll see you again soon. And thank you. Talk to you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.